Hey everyone, ready to dive deep into the world of Troy? Released on May 14, 2004, this film has sparked endless discussions, and today, we're uncovering every thrilling detail. If you enjoy this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps us grow. And for more incredible movie explorations and hidden gems, subscribe to the channel. Now, let's unravel the magic behind this cinematic masterpiece. Few films have ever managed to merge grand spectacle, timeless mythology, and deeply human emotion with the same intensity as Troy, which stormed into theaters on May 14, 2004. Directed by Wolfgang Petersen and featuring a powerhouse ensemble cast, this cinematic retelling of Homer's Iliad isn't merely a recounting of gods and warriors. It's an operatic exploration of glory, love, pride, and the legacies men carve into the world through blood and sacrifice. From its thunderous battles to its haunting quiet moments, Troy is not just a war film. It's a portrait of humanity at its most raw and poetic, wrapped in the flames of one of the most legendary conflicts ever told. What sets Troy apart isn't just its colossal scale or A-list stars. It's how it transforms myth into mortal flesh. In many ancient stories, the gods shape fate, manipulating the lives of men from Mount Olympus. But here, the film strips away the supernatural and gives us a tale grounded in political ambition, heartbreak, and personal vendettas. The film takes the legend of the Trojan War and reimagines it with brutal realism, a choice that both modernizes the story and makes it feel achingly relevant. Brad Pitt's Achilles isn't just the greatest warrior alive. He's a man trapped between his disdain for kings and his obsession with eternal glory. His presence commands every scene he's in, and Pitt's chiseled performance is as magnetic as it is conflicted, capturing the loneliness that haunts those who dare to reach for immortality. From the moment the Greek armies arrive on the shores of Troy, the film pulses with momentum. The war isn't treated as a backdrop. It's a living, breathing beast. Swords clash, shields splinter, and cities burn, all captured through sweeping cinematography and James Horner's soaring score, which pierces the soul and elevates the emotional weight of every decision made on the battlefield. But amidst the grandeur, Troy never forgets the human cost of war. Every duel, every strategy, every sacrifice carries weight. And perhaps the film's most stunning achievement is how it constantly forces the viewer to question the meaning of heroism. Is it found in honor, in duty, or in the refusal to fight at all? The film's central tension unfolds between two warriors, Achilles and Hector. Eric Bana delivers a performance of restrained nobility as Hector, the Prince of Troy, torn between his obligations to family and his responsibility to defend his city. He is the embodiment of duty, a man who would rather live in peace but fights because he must. In contrast, Achilles fights because he wants to, because war is where he feels most alive. Yet even he wrestles with the emptiness that comes after victory. Their legendary duel is not just one of the most memorable sequences in the film, but a microcosm of the story itself. Honor clashing with ambition, love colliding with fate. It's a scene drenched in emotion, with no victor truly emerging unscarred. Of course, no story about the fall of Troy is complete without Paris and Helen, the young lovers whose passion doomed a nation. Orlando Bloom plays Paris not as a hero, but as a boy in over his head, torn between desire and consequence. Diane Kruger's Helen, often reduced in mythology to a face that launched 1,000 ships, is given more nuance here. She's not just a prize or a symbol. She's a woman caught between two worlds, trying to make sense of the chaos she unintentionally triggered. Their story isn't about romance in the traditional sense. It's about the ripple effect of choices, and how personal emotion can reshape the destiny of entire civilizations. Then there's Agamemnon, the power-hungry king of Mycenae, portrayed with brutal arrogance by Brian Cox. His role in the war is not born from justice but from greed. Helen is just an excuse to conquer. Agamemnon doesn't seek glory like Achilles or defend family like Hector. He wants dominance. His character adds a layer of political manipulation to the narrative, reminding us that behind every war, there's often a man pulling the strings for reasons far removed from honor or love. His clash with Achilles over control, respect, and legacy builds much of the tension in the film's early acts and ultimately serves as the catalyst for many of the tragedies that unfold. But Troy is not just about the war itself, it's about the moments between the battles. The film takes time to breathe, to reflect, to let its characters wonder what it's all for. The romance between Achilles and Briseis, played by Rose Byrne, is unexpectedly tender, offering a rare glimpse into the vulnerability of a man believed to be untouchable. Through her, Achilles begins to question his path, wondering whether glory is worth the cost of love and peace. It's through Briseis that the film shows us another side of its most ferocious warrior, a man capable of compassion, who slowly begins to understand that a name remembered forever may still echo in an empty silence. Visually, Troy is breathtaking. The sets, built to scale in locations like Malta and Mexico, recreate the ancient world with stunning authenticity. The city of Troy itself feels alive. Its towering gates, gleaming palaces, and bustling streets serve not just as a backdrop but as a character, a place that feels worth fighting for. The battles are massive and choreographed with precision, with every clash of steel feeling personal. The duel choreography, especially between Achilles and Hector, stands out as a masterclass in tension and physical storytelling. Each blow tells a story, and every movement reveals something deeper about the characters. Pride, fear, resolve. Behind the scenes, the production of Troy was as epic as the film itself. Brad Pitt trained intensely for months to achieve not only Achilles' physical form but also his fighting style, heavily influenced by ancient Greek combat techniques. Ironically and almost poetically, Pitt tore his Achilles tendon during filming, an injury that mirrored his character's ultimate fate. The attention to detail throughout production is staggering, from the ornate armor designs to the use of over 1,000 extras in key battle scenes. Director Wolfgang Petersen, known for Das Boot and The Perfect Storm, approached the film with a deep respect for history and myth, balancing spectacle with intimate storytelling. Critics at the time offered mixed reviews, with some praising its ambition and performances, while others felt it veered too far from Homer's original tale. But over time, Troy has found its audience. It has become a cult classic of the historical epic genre, appreciated for its mature tone, grounded realism, and thematic weight. In a world saturated with superhero fantasies and digital battles, Troy stands as a testament to the power of flesh and blood storytelling. It dares to strip the mythology down to its bones and ask the hard questions. What drives a man to war? What does it mean to be remembered? And is the pursuit of immortality through fame worth the cost of everything else? One of the most haunting aspects of the film is its ending. As Troy burns and the Greeks emerge victorious, there's no real triumph. The cost of glory is unbearable. Achilles, who sought immortality, lies dead. Hector, the defender of his people, is gone. Paris and Helen vanish into the unknown, and Priam, the once great king of Troy, is left to mourn everything he's lost. It's a finale that stings, not because it shocks, but because it feels inevitable. Fate, in this world, is not guided by gods but by the fatal flaws of men. Troy became a cultural phenomenon because it brought ancient legend to life without magic or divine intervention. It showed us that behind every myth, there's a beating human heart, flawed, passionate, and fragile. The film found resonance with audiences across the world because it asked timeless questions wrapped in timeless stories. It painted warriors not as invincible figures but as men afraid of being forgotten, fighting not only for country or cause, but for meaning. That universal desire for one's life to matter, for one's name to be remembered, is what gives Troy its enduring power. Whether you're drawn to the thunder of armies, the complexity of ancient politics, the ache of impossible love, or the raw intensity of one-on-one combat, Troy delivers it all. It's not just a film, it's an experience. A thunderous, aching, beautiful descent into legend that lingers long after the last arrow is fired and the last sword is drawn. And in its silence, in its ashes, it leaves us with the same question that haunts Achilles. What will they say of you when you're gone? If you haven't revisited Troy in a while, or perhaps never seen it, it's time to let its story wash over you again. Not just for the battles, not just for the history, but for the timeless truths buried in its dust. For in the fall of Troy we see ourselves, our ambition, our love, our rage, our need to be remembered. And in that, the film becomes more than myth. It becomes mirror. A legend, yes, but one that feels more human than ever. The world of Troy opens not with the roar of war, but with tension thick in the air. One that speaks of fragile peace hanging by a thread. It's a world carved by steel and pride, where empires rise and fall on the whims of kings and the ambitions of men. We're taken back to the 12th century BC, into a Greece not yet unified but deeply fragmented, where city-states like Sparta, Thessaly, and Mycenae vie for dominance. In the film's electrifying opening, two rival kings are poised to send thousands of men to their deaths, until they agree to let the outcome be decided by a single duel. One man steps forward, a towering brute of a warrior. The other is nowhere to be seen. But he's coming. Achilles, the greatest warrior of his time, enters the scene not with pageantry, but with raw power. Brad Pitt's Achilles walks like a man who knows he cannot be beaten, his reputation heavy in the air before he even draws his sword. With a swift, godlike motion, he ends the fight before it truly begins. The war is avoided, but a storm is clearly gathering. This duel, brief yet thunderous, sets the tone for everything to come. Achilles isn't just a fighter. He is war itself, untamed, unpredictable, and disillusioned. He doesn't serve kings because he respects them, but because he seeks something far greater than gold or territory. He wants his name to live forever. But this very desire makes him dangerous, especially to men like Agamemnon, the power-hungry king of Mycenae. Brian Cox infuses Agamemnon with pure, seething ambition. He doesn't want unity for peace, he wants it for control. Achilles is a weapon he can't command, a force that will never kneel. Their disdain for each other is mutual, and from the start, it's clear that this tension will ignite fires far beyond the battlefield. Meanwhile, across the sea in the shining city of Troy, diplomacy is unfolding, or so it seems. Prince Hector of Troy, played with fierce honor and subtle melancholy by Bana, has sailed to Sparta alongside his younger brother Paris, portrayed by Orlando Bloom. The intention is peace, a treaty between Troy and Sparta that might halt generations of bloodshed. But while the kings discuss politics, something far more personal is happening behind closed doors. Paris and Helen, the queen of Sparta, are locked in a forbidden love affair. Diane Kruger's Helen is more than a beautiful face. She's a woman trapped in a life of duty, aching for freedom, for something real. When Paris begs her to return with him to Troy, she agrees, knowing it will spark war but believing love is worth the risk. And so, with one reckless, passionate decision, the fate of thousands is sealed. Hector, ever the responsible elder brother, is furious when he discovers Helen aboard their ship. He knows what this will mean. Sparta will demand her return, and Agamemnon will use the insult as justification for war. Still, they sail on, and the audience feels the weight of the coming storm. Back in Sparta, Menelaus, Helen's husband and the king, is consumed by betrayal and rage. But the real fire burns in Agamemnon, who sees this as the perfect excuse to rally all of Greece under his command. It's not about Helen. It never was. She is simply the spark. The prize Agamemnon truly seeks is Troy itself, a city that has defied his influence for too long. He summons an armada, thousands of ships, tens of thousands of men, and one reluctant champion, Achilles. The preparation for war begins, and the drums of battle echo before the first sword is drawn. Achilles, though disgusted by Agamemnon's motives, joins the campaign not for king or country, but because he believes Troy will be the battlefield where legends are made. His cousin and protege, Patroclus, joins him, a youthful warrior full of admiration and loyalty, and perhaps the only person who can reach the softer side of Achilles. Odysseus, played with wily charm by Sean Bean, understands Achilles better than most. He knows that the path to victory may lie not in force, but in strategy, and that the hearts of men can be far more unpredictable than the tides. As the massive fleet lands on the beaches of Troy, the film wastes no time thrusting us into chaos. In one of the most thrilling and brutal sequences, Achilles leads the charge, swiftly taking the temple of Apollo and sending a message to Troy. The war has begun. Achilles moves like a force of nature, blades flashing, enemies falling. And in this moment, we see the terrifying beauty of his skill. He is a killer with purpose, but also with questions. In the aftermath of the assault, he meets Briseis, a Trojan priestess and cousin to Hector and Paris. Captured and brought before the Greeks, she becomes a prisoner of war, and the beginning of something unexpected in Achilles' journey. Their first interactions are charged, not with romance, but with confrontation. Briseis challenges Achilles' view of glory, calling out the emptiness in his pursuit. For perhaps the first time, Achilles begins to see beyond his legend. But peace is a fleeting thing in this story. Agamemnon, seeking to humiliate Achilles and remind him who truly holds power, claims Briseis for himself. It's a calculated move, one that tears open the fragile bond between warrior and king. Enraged, Achilles withdraws from the war, vowing not to fight another battle under Agamemnon's command. The Greek army may be massive, but without Achilles, their morale begins to crack. Inside the gates of Troy, tension builds. King Priam, played with regal sorrow by Peter O'Toole, prepares his people for the siege to come. Hector knows the Greeks will not relent. He must defend his home, his family, and his honor. He trains his soldiers, fortifies the walls, and holds his people together as fear creeps in. Paris, though brave in love, is untested in war. He insists on dueling Menelaus to settle the conflict and avoid bloodshed, a noble but naive gesture. What follows is a duel soaked in tension and shame. Menelaus is a seasoned warrior, and Paris, overwhelmed, falls quickly. As Menelaus prepares to finish him, Hector intervenes, killing Menelaus to save his brother. The Greeks, stunned by the betrayal of the duel's rules, erupt in fury. The war that could have ended with a duel now surges forward, angrier and bloodier than before. This moment changes everything. Hector, once the symbol of restraint and diplomacy, is now the man who killed a Greek king. There's no turning back. The Greeks attack, but the walls of Troy hold strong. And still, Achilles remains in his tent, watching the war unfold without him. His pride won't allow him to serve Agamemnon, but his silence echoes louder with every life lost. Patroclus, desperate to end the bloodshed and make his mentor proud, takes matters into his own hands. Disguised in Achilles' armor, he battle, hoping to inspire victory by invoking Achilles' fearsome presence. The Greeks rally, believing their champion has returned. But the truth is far more tragic. In the thick of battle, Patroclus is confronted by Hector. The two fight with ferocity, but Hector, believing he is facing Achilles, strikes a fatal blow. When he pulls off the helmet and sees Patroclus' face, horror overtakes him. He did not mean to kill a boy. He did not mean to cross the one man who could destroy everything. Word reaches Achilles quickly, and what follows is one of the most emotionally charged sequences in the film. Achilles, shattered by grief and rage, roars like a wounded god. His vengeance is swift and absolute. He returns to the battlefield, his fury unstoppable. The soldiers part before him like water. He wants only one man, Hector. And this is where the first half of Troy reaches its crescendo, a moment carved into cinematic history. Achilles arrives at the gates of Troy, alone, and calls for Hector to face him. The city watches in silence. Priam pleads with his son not to go. But Hector, ever the man of honor, knows this is the price he must pay. The duel between Achilles and Hector is not just a clash of warriors. It is the collision of ideologies. Glory versus duty, pride versus sacrifice. The choreography is brutal, elegant, and heartbreaking. Blow for blow, they fight under the gaze of gods who never intervene. And in the end, Achilles wins. But it is not a victory. It is a tragedy. As he drags Hector's body behind his chariot, circling the city, we see not triumph, but pain, an agony that devours everything it touches. Priam falls to his knees, Paris weeps, and Achilles, for all his power, feels the cold emptiness of revenge fulfilled. The first half of Troy is not merely a setup for war, it is a slow, relentless unraveling of humanity. Every decision, every betrayal, every death is a thread pulled loose from the fabric of history. And what's to come will change not just the fate of Troy, but the lives of every soul still standing within its burning shadow. As the dust settles from the thunderous duel between Achilles and Hector, Troy enters a more somber and introspective phase, but the stakes are higher than ever. Hector's lifeless body lies tied behind Achilles' chariot, dragged mercilessly around the Greek camp, a grim display of vengeance that sends shockwaves through both sides. But beneath the cold brutality, there's a storm brewing within Achilles. He has taken his revenge, but it offers no peace. The moment is raw, painful, and unervingly quiet. It's in this silence that one of the most powerful and human moments in the film arrives. Under the cover of darkness, King Priam, aged and heartbroken, sneaks into the Greek camp, past sleeping guards and enemies who would kill him without hesitation. He enters Achilles' tent not as a king, but as a father. Peter O'Toole's performance in this scene is a masterclass in restrained sorrow. He doesn't beg or plead. He simply kneels before the man who killed his son and asks for his boy's body back. And Achilles, at first stunned, then humbled, is cracked open by the weight of it. For the first time, the myth begins to falter and the man underneath is revealed. Brad Pitt captures this moment with a haunting quiet. He sees Priam not as an enemy, but as a mirror, a man who has loved deeply and lost everything. Achilles breaks down. He returns Hector's body, allowing Priam to take it home. It's not just a moment of grace. It's a turning point. Achilles has been fighting for glory, but in Priam's tears, he sees something greater: humanity, compassion, legacy not built on fame, but on the love left behind. He knows now that his time is short. As Priam leaves, the world feels still. It's a temporary ceasefire, but the final act is already looming. Back in Troy, grief turns to resolve. Hector was the shield of the city. Now that he's gone, the burden of leadership and defense falls on Paris. Orlando Bloom's transformation from boyish lover to determined protector begins here. With Helen by his side, he takes up his brother's sword. And while he doesn't have Hector's strength, he carries a growing fire, one fueled by the need to protect the people and the woman he loves. The city mourns, but it does not fall. Meanwhile, Agamemnon is far from finished. Hector's death only adds fuel to his ambition. He wants Troy reduced to ashes. But without Achilles' full cooperation, his grip is slipping. He's beginning to sense that victory, though close, could still be lost if he can't command his warriors. His cruelty sharpens. Briseis, whom he once seized to spite Achilles, becomes a pawn again. But when she escapes and runs into the arms of Achilles, the warrior makes a decision that signals his final break with the Greek king. He'll fight, but on his own terms. Achilles is done chasing a hollow legacy. He doesn't want the world to remember his wrath. He wants to leave something behind that matters. His growing bond with Briseis, tender and quietly transformative, becomes the anchor he never knew he needed. She sees him not as a god of war, but as a man broken, brilliant, and worthy of love. Their intimacy offers a fleeting glimpse of peace in a film dominated by battle and bloodshed. But peace, as always, is short-lived. The Greeks devise their last and most famous gambit, the plan that will define the story for thousands of years. Odysseus, cunning and calculating, proposes the use of deception. A gift, a trap, the Trojan horse. They will pretend to retreat, leaving behind a massive wooden structure as a supposed token of surrender. Inside, Greek soldiers will hide, waiting for night to fall. It's bold, it's desperate, and it works. The Trojans awaken to find the beach empty. Ships are gone, and the sand is still. The city erupts in cautious celebration. Against warnings from Cassandra, against Paris' growing suspicions, the horse is brought into the heart of Troy as a trophy. It is a fatal mistake. That night, as fires burn and celebrations continue, the Greek warriors hidden inside emerge, unlocking the city gates from within. The Greek army floods in, unleashing devastation. What follows is nothing short of a massacre. The walls that held for so long crumble from the inside. The people are slaughtered. Priam, in a heartbreaking and symbolic scene, is murdered at the altar where he once found mercy. Agamemnon's bloodlust reaches its peak. He doesn't want to win, he wants to dominate. He wants history to remember him as the man who crushed Troy. But his arrogance proves to be his undoing. Briseis, cornered in the temple, confronts Agamemnon. And in a moment that feels both personal and mythic, she kills him. It's justice, not just for herself, but for all the lives twisted by his ambition. With Agamemnon dead, the political power behind the war collapses. But the destruction continues. Achilles, knowing the city is burning, has one purpose left: to save Briseis. He fights his way through the chaos, a one-man army, bloodied and relentless. But fate, cruel and poetic, is waiting. As he helps Briseis escape with the last of the survivors, he's spotted by Paris. And Paris, now hardened by war and the loss of his brother and father, sees only the man who killed Hector. He doesn't know the full story. He doesn't see Achilles change. He sees a threat. Armed with Hector's bow, Paris takes aim. Achilles sees the arrow fly and steps in front of Briseis, shielding her. Another arrow comes, then another. Each one finds its mark. Achilles stumbles. He falls. And just like that, the godlike warrior is brought to his knees by a mortal wound, not in battle but in sacrifice. His death is not one of glory, but of choice. He chose to protect, to love, and in that, he finds something greater than legend. Briseis weeps over him. Paris watches, his vengeance complete, but unsure of what it has truly cost. The war is over, but the scars remain. The final scenes of Troy are quiet, reflective. The survivors flee through a secret tunnel, led by Paris. The once mighty city now lies in ruins. Smoke curls through the streets. Statues fall. A civilization is lost, and with it, the dreams of countless generations. But even in the ashes, something endures. Odysseus, standing among the rubble, delivers a simple, powerful tribute to Achilles. He says that if the stories are remembered, if the name is spoken, then the man lives on. Not as a god, not as a weapon, but as a man who changed the course of history. A man who fought for something real in a world drowning in illusions. Troy ends not with a victory march, but with the haunting echo of loss, of ambition devouring honor, of love caught in the tides of war. Every thread, Achilles' search for purpose, Hector's sense of duty, Paris' defiance, Briseis' strength, Priam's dignity, intertwines into a narrative that feels as old as time and yet timeless. It's not just a story about war. It's a story about what survives it. A story that asks what truly lasts. The cities we build, the empires we forge, or the choices we make in the moments that matter most. And so, the legend of Troy ends, not with a bang, but with a whispered name. Achilles, remembered. In Troy, character is destiny. Beneath the sweeping visuals, grand battles, and mythological roots, it is the human heart that drives the story forward, torn by love, ambition, grief, honor, and vengeance. From its towering leads to its quietly unforgettable supporting roles, the film is a character-driven epic, where every arc bends with emotional weight and narrative consequence. At its core, this is not just a retelling of the fall of Troy. It's a mosaic of souls caught in the inescapable tide of fate. And in that mosaic, one man stands at the storm's center, Achilles. Portrayed with steely restraint and brooding depth by Pitt, Achilles is both the blade and the bruise of the film. From the opening frames, he is the embodiment of untouchable skill. His fighting is effortless, almost divine, but his soul is anything but invincible. What drives Achilles is not love of war, but fear of insignificance. He is haunted by a legacy not yet written, by the idea that his name could vanish with time if he does not claim eternal glory. He sneers at kings, defies Agamemnon, and fights not for nations but for memory. Yet, beneath the muscle and myth is a man fractured by his own legend. Pitt never plays Achilles as a mere warrior. There's a deliberate stillness in his presence, a quiet fury that simmers beneath his surface. He's not bloodthirsty, he's burdened. When he fights, it's surgical, almost sorrowful. When he speaks, it's with the weariness of someone who has seen too much, killed too much, and still found nothing that fills the void. The transformation begins subtly. His connection with Briseis, a Trojan priestess turned prisoner, becomes the first crack in his armor. She is unlike anyone he's ever known. She doesn't tremble before him. She doesn't see a god. She sees a man drowning in contradictions, and it changes him. Briseis, played with grace and quiet strength by Rose Byrne, is far more than a love interest. She is the moral compass of the film. Through her eyes, we see the devastation Achilles causes, and through her heart, he begins to question the path he's on. Her dignity, even in captivity, speaks volumes. She is not passive. She defies Agamemnon, she challenges Achilles, and in the end, she delivers justice. It is Briseis who catalyzes Achilles' redemption, not by taming him, but by forcing him to confront what truly matters. In a world of warriors and tyrants, her humanity is radical. Then there's Hector, portrayed with noble conviction by Bana. If Achilles is a man torn by legacy, Hector is the man who tries to rise above it. He is duty-bound, loyal, and full of quiet sorrow. He never asked for war, but he leads it because his people need him. Bana plays Hector as the emotional core of the film, a man who knows that every battle he wins brings him closer to death, but who never steps away from his responsibilities. His scenes with his wife, Andromache, and son are filled with a heartbreaking tenderness. In a story fueled by ambition, Hector is grounded in love, for family, for peace, for Troy itself. His duel with Achilles isn't just the film's centerpiece. It's the spiritual climax. Two men, opposite in nature, drawn into combat by forces beyond their control. When Hector dies, it feels like the soul of Troy dies with him. But it also cracks something open in Achilles. The man who came to Troy to make his name immortal suddenly realizes what truly matters isn't the songs they'll sing, but the people who will mourn. Standing at the other end of the moral spectrum is Agamemnon, brought to life with calculating venom by Brian Cox. He is not a hero, nor does he pretend to be. He is power incarnate, unapologetic, arrogant, driven by conquest. Agamemnon wages war not for love or honor, but for empire. Troy, to him, is not a city, it is a prize. And in that ruthless pursuit, he becomes a reflection of the darkest instincts of men in power. Cox's performance is deliciously brutal, never tipping into caricature, always keeping one foot in realism. He is the reminder that sometimes the greatest monsters are not born of myth, but of unchecked ambition. Orlando Bloom's Paris is perhaps the film's most divisive character, weak where others are strong, reactive where others are deliberate. But that is precisely the point. Paris is the spark that ignites the inferno. His love for Helen, reckless and blind, is the match that sets the world on fire. Yet his arc is quietly compelling. Bloom infuses Paris with youthful impulsiveness, but as the film progresses, we see him harden. When he takes up his brother's sword after Hector's death, he becomes something more, a protector, not a hero, not a king, but a man who finally understands consequence. Diane Kruger's Helen defies the traditional framing of her character. In literature, she is often reduced to a symbol, a face, a prize, a cause. But here, she is a woman trapped between worlds. Her guilt is palpable, her love for Paris real but not naive. Kruger plays her with a softness that belies deep internal conflict. She doesn't revel in the war fought over her. She aches for its end. Her presence reminds us that in myth, people are often stripped of complexity. In Troy, Helen is given it back. And then, quietly lurking behind strategies and speeches, is Odysseus, played with subtle brilliance by Sean Bean. He is not the loudest, nor the strongest, but he is always listening, always watching. Odysseus is the mind in a sea of muscle. His loyalty to Achilles, his manipulation of the Trojan horse plan, his recognition of the fragility of legacy, all of it cements him as a vital thread in the narrative. He understands the cost of war in ways others do not. When he speaks to Achilles of remembrance, of songs sung long after their deaths, it is not mere flattery, it is foresight. Supporting roles like Peter O'Toole's Priam elevate the emotional core of the film. Priam is not just a king. He is a grieving father, a symbol of grace amidst carnage. His nighttime plea to Achilles, a masterclass in quiet dignity, is one of the most human scenes in a film filled with gods and monsters. O'Toole's eyes say more than any monologue could, eyes that have seen generations rise and fall, and yet still hold hope for mercy. Even characters like Menelaus, Brendan Gleeson, Andromache, Saffron Burrows, and Uterus, Vincent Regan, bring layered meaning. Menelaus is all rage and wounded pride. His obsession with Helen eclipses any tactical sense. His death is not noble. It's the byproduct of personal vendetta. Andromache, Hector's wife, is the quiet pillar of Troy, bearing the weight of inevitable loss with heartbreaking resilience. Uterus, Achilles' lieutenant, serves as a grounding force, a soldier bound by loyalty, whose sorrow at the loss of his commander reveals the cracks in the myth of invincibility. All these performances, all these arcs, flow together like rivers into an ocean. What Troy captures so elegantly is that these characters are not static. They are not bound to myth. They shift, they hurt, they change. Achilles begins as a legend but dies a man. Hector dies a hero, but his soul lingers in every brick of the city he died defending. Paris learns responsibility. Briseis finds strength. Priam finds grace in despair. And Odysseus understands that memory itself is a form of immortality. The cast of Troy breathes fire and fragility into every frame. It's a film where war is the backdrop, but humanity is the heart, where characters don't just walk through history, they shape it. And in their triumphs and failures, in their tenderness and rage, they become more than figures from the past. They become eternal, not because of the battles they fought, but because of the choices they made. Choices that echo through time. Choices that, in the end, remind us what it means to be remembered. When watching Troy, the grandeur of its sweeping battles and poetic dialogue can easily command your attention. But beneath the surface of bronze and blood, the film hides a treasure trove of subtle details and nuanced storytelling that only reveal themselves upon closer inspection. Wolfgang Petersen didn't just direct a war epic. He crafted a layered cinematic tapestry full of hidden gems, symbolic imagery, and clever foreshadowing that elevates the experience far beyond the myth it adapts. To truly appreciate Troy, you must look past the clashing swords and into the shadows of its frames, where ancient whispers echo through the choices of its characters and the quiet details embedded in its design. Even from the opening sequence, the film leans into thematic symbolism. The duel between Achilles and Boagrius, where Achilles defeats his opponent with a single, almost lazy thrust, isn't just to show his prowess. It foreshadows the lethality of his precision and contrasts the spectacle of war with the ease of death. The move he uses, a running leap and downward stab to the shoulder, is later mirrored in his climactic duel with Hector, except then it comes with gravity and sorrow, not arrogance. It's a subtle circle closing, telling us that while his body moves the same, Achilles' soul is no longer in the same place. The armor choices in Troy are another canvas of subtext. Achilles' armor, sleek and obsidian black, is unlike that of any other Greek warrior. It's almost otherworldly, as though he is already marked by death. It visually separates him from the rest of Agamemnon's forces, signaling his disdain for kings and his obsession with legacy. The armor also nods to mythological interpretations of Achilles as more than mortal. Even more compelling is how, after Achilles' death, Paris dons this same armor when he takes up arms to defend the city. It's not just practical, it's metaphorical. The torch of legacy, of heroism, however fractured, is being passed on. In Hector's arc, we see foreshadowing embedded in the architecture of his relationships. His goodbyes are never just goodbyes. When he shares a final, intimate moment with Andromache and their son, he removes his helmet and kneels before the boy. The moment might seem tender, but it echoes a deeper tragedy. Hector's human side pleading for connection before he becomes another casualty of fate. The helmet itself, placed briefly on his son's head, eerily prefigures the burden of war being passed down generations. Hector may die a hero, but his son inherits a world shattered by honor. There's also a moment of chilling foreshadowing tucked within Achilles' early conversation with Briseis. When she accuses him of killing without mercy, he tells her, "The gods envy us. They envy us because we're mortal." It's a poetic line that blooms with weight as the story unfolds. Achilles, who lives with one foot in myth and the other in misery, sees death not as a curse but as the very thing that makes life matter. It redefines his arc and sets the stage for his final acts, not as a godlike warrior chasing legend, but as a man embracing mortality, legacy, and love. Briseis herself is layered with thematic weight. As a priestess of Apollo, her presence alongside Achilles adds an ironic twist. Apollo is the very god who, in Homer's original text, brings about Achilles' death. Though the film alters many mythological elements, this symbolic connection lingers. Achilles' affection for a servant of the god who ultimately seals his fate adds a poetic inevitability to his downfall, one of many subtle ways the film threads myth into its character dynamics. Another overlooked detail lies in Paris's behavior after fleeing his duel with Menelaus. While the script doesn't pause to underline it, the camera lingers just long enough to show the shame in his body language. The way he avoids Hector's gaze, the hesitation in returning to Helen. Paris is often dismissed as cowardly, but the film plants hints of his internal war. The way he fingers the handle of Hector's sword later on, after his brother's death, shows the slow transformation of a boy into a man bearing guilt. And when he eventually uses that same sword to kill Achilles, it's more than just a lucky shot. It's a moment soaked in irony, revenge, and the collapse of greatness. And that moment, the death of Achilles, is another example of silent visual storytelling. Paris fires multiple arrows, each one hitting key parts of Achilles' body, but it's the final arrow through the heel that delivers the fatal blow. While the film avoids invoking the literal Achilles' heel myth in dialogue, the choice to visually confirm the legend without stating it outright is a brilliant act of restraint. It's a reward for those who know the myth while maintaining realism within the film's grounded tone. The fact that Achilles continues to stand, even after the fatal shot, only falling once he accepts his fate, transforms that moment into a haunting metaphor for resistance against destiny. In the Trojan horse sequence, there's yet another buried gem. As the Trojans will the massive wooden structure into the city, you can see fear and uncertainty in the faces of the crowd. While the elders praise it as a peace offering, several shots reveal children and women hesitant, almost instinctively sensing something ominous. It's subtle visual irony. Those least involved in the war are the ones closest to the truth. And inside the horse, a tense silence hangs over Odysseus and his men, where one wrong breath could cost them all their lives. That moment, visually staged with hushed desperation, echoes the silence before a storm, a moment of eerie calm before Troy's final collapse. Odysseus, too, offers small but resonant insights. While his role isn't as central as others, he is often placed in shots just behind the action, his expression contemplative. He's the architect of the horse, yes, but he also understands the cost. One especially meaningful detail is the way he looks at Priam's body after the sacking of Troy. The grief in his eyes, the weight of war bearing down on his conscience, says more than any speech could. It quietly foreshadows the pain he'll face on his own journey home, a nod to the epic that follows in the Odyssey. The film also hides a brilliant detail in its lighting. As Achilles walks through the burning ruins of Troy to rescue Briseis, flames flicker behind him, casting shadows that resemble wings. Just for a moment, he appears angelic or perhaps demonic. The symbolism is powerful. Achilles is both the savior and the destroyer. He came for glory, but leaves with ash in his hands. This visual metaphor cements the duality of his character, worshipped as a god, but fated to die like a man. And the dialogue, layered, often poetic, hides its own echoes. Early in the film, Achilles is told by his mother, "If you stay in Larissa, you will find peace. You will marry, but your name will be forgotten." The line isn't just maternal advice. It's a thesis for the entire film. Every decision Achilles makes ripples out from that choice, to be remembered or to be happy. His tragedy is that he never truly believes he can have both, until it's too late. Priam's plea for Hector's body carries its own powerful subtext. When he kneels before Achilles, he invokes not only fatherhood, but shared humanity. I have endured what no one on earth has endured before. I kissed the hands of the man who killed my son. The scene is lifted nearly word for word from the Iliad, an intentional homage that grounds the film in its literary roots. But more than a reference, it's a turning point. Achilles, so long consumed by rage, is disarmed by grief. The most brutal warrior becomes a silent mourner, letting go of his vengeance for one fleeting moment of understanding. The music of Troy, composed by James Horner, carries hidden motifs that tie these moments together. The haunting vocal cues that accompany Briseis echo again during Achilles' death, linking her presence to his downfall. Subtle instrument choices, flutes for Hector, strings for Paris, trace their emotional arcs without overwhelming the scene. Horner's score isn't just background, it's narrative in disguise. Even the final shots of the film hold symbolic closure. As Troy burns, survivors like Aeneas carry their city's legacy into the unknown. Aeneas is no minor detail. He is a direct link to Roman mythology, the legendary ancestor of Rome itself. His quiet exit from the ruins isn't just an end. It's a beginning. For viewers aware of ancient history, it's a nod that the fall of one empire seeds the rise of another. A gesture toward the cyclical nature of power, of stories, of civilizations. And so, the beauty of Troy lies not just in what it shows, but in what it suggests. In the echo of a glance, the shadow of a flame, the stillness before a sword strike. It rewards those who look deeper, not just at the spectacle, but at the details that hold it together. For a film so grand, it never forgets the small things. The quiet sighs, the mirrored moves, the symmetry of fate. These are the whispers of the past, wrapped in bronze and dust, waiting to be discovered. Before a single sword was drawn or 1,000 ships launched, Troy had already begun its war. Not on the shores of an ancient city, but behind the camera, across continents, through tempests, torn ligaments, rewrites, and rivalries. What unfolded wasn't just the recreation of an ancient epic. It was a modern odyssey of filmmaking, filled with strange decisions, whispered controversies, and a scale of ambition that, like the Greeks' conquest of Troy, bordered on madness. It all started with a dream to bring Homer's Iliad to life, not just in fragments, not as a mere art film, but as a sweeping Hollywood epic. Director Wolfgang Petersen, fresh off the success of The Perfect Storm, was drawn to the idea of man versus fate, glory versus mortality. But adapting Homer was no easy feat. The original text spans only a few weeks, focuses heavily on gods and divine interventions, and leaves out huge swaths of the Trojan War saga, including the infamous wooden horse. So screenwriter David Benioff, yes, the same David Benioff who would later become infamous for Game of Thrones, took the mythology and stripped it of magic. No gods, no immortals, just men. And in that decision came both the boldness and controversy. Some praised Troy for grounding its story, making Achilles a man instead of a demigod. Others felt it gutted the soul of the myth. But Benioff and Petersen weren't aiming to make a textbook adaptation. They wanted something visceral, something raw. And so began one of the most ambitious productions of the early 2000s. The cast assembled was a dream and a storm. Brad Pitt, cast as Achilles, was at the height of his fame but had never done a full-scale epic. Eric Bana, fresh from Hulk, would step into the emotionally complex role of Hector. Orlando Bloom, fresh off the Lord of the Rings trilogy, would become Paris, the handsome coward of myth. Brian Cox brought regal menace as Agamemnon, and Peter O'Toole, a cinematic legend, embodied King Priam with aching gravitas. But while the names shimmered on posters, the production itself was anything but golden behind the scenes. The filming location was as epic as the story it was telling. Principal photography was based in Baja California, Mexico, using the massive sets constructed for James Cameron's Titanic. Later, they'd moved to Malta for the walls of Troy and the Greek encampments. But this came with massive logistical challenges. The climate was brutal. In Mexico, extreme heat would often cause dehydration and illness among extras, some of whom wore armor for hours under the scorching sun. But Malta brought the real chaos. On May 18, 2003, a freak storm tore through Malta's coast. The 400-foot-long set of the Trojan city, painstakingly built by hundreds of craftsmen, was ripped apart overnight. What had taken months to create was destroyed in mere minutes. Production was halted. Millions of dollars were lost. Rebuilding began immediately, but that was only the beginning of the troubles. During filming of the climactic duel between Achilles and Hector, disaster struck. Brad Pitt, who had trained for months in swordplay and physicality, tore his Achilles tendon. The irony was painful. He was playing Achilles, the man fated to die from a heel wound, and now here he was injured in that very spot. Production was delayed again. Some rewrites were done to allow Pitt to shoot scenes that didn't require intense physical movement while he recovered. Though he eventually healed, the injury haunted the shoot and added an eerie layer of myth to the man portraying the half-god hero. But that wasn't the only strange twist involving Pitt. He had originally turned down the role of Achilles, not feeling drawn to the script. It was only after reading a revised version that focused more on existential themes, glory, mortality, and legacy, that he agreed. And even then, he would later reflect that he struggled during the shoot, feeling creatively constrained. In later interviews, he candidly admitted he didn't fully enjoy the process, calling it a turning point in understanding the kinds of films he wanted to make. Troy was a lesson for both actor and character in what it means to pursue glory only to feel hollow in its wake. Eric Bana, on the other hand, embraced his role with quiet intensity. Yet he was also thrown into one of the most intense physical demands of his career. The duel between Hector and Achilles wasn't choreographed in the traditional sense. Petersen wanted it to feel organic and brutal. So Pitt and Bana trained for weeks, not just rehearsing but actually learning to fight each other with real blades. Dull but still dangerous. They made a pact. No stunt doubles. What we see on screen is real. Two actors throwing down with genuine skill and exhaustion. To avoid injuries, they agreed on a penalty system. Each time one actor accidentally struck the other, they'd owe the other a case of beer. Brad Pitt lost that bet repeatedly. And then there's the tale of Peter O'Toole, a living legend, but one not easily impressed. O'Toole reportedly clashed with Pitt during their emotional confrontation as Priam begs Achilles to return Hector's body. O'Toole, classically trained and used to a more theatrical method, didn't appreciate what he perceived as Pitt's laid-back, modern acting style. The tension between them off-screen bled into their characters on-screen, ironically adding authenticity to a scene charged with sorrow, pride, and regret. Beyond the interpersonal dynamics, there were broader controversies too. The decision to make Troy a godless tale drew criticism from purists. Many fans of Greek mythology were disappointed by the absence of divine characters like Athena, Apollo, and Zeus, who play major roles in the original text. Petersen stood firm, stating he wanted to show how men justify war with the illusion of the gods, rather than attribute every act of violence to divine will. It was a creative gamble, and one that still sparks debate today. Then came the cultural controversies. The film faced backlash in Greece and Turkey over the location of ancient Troy, with both countries having historical and nationalistic claims to the ruins of the city. Turkish officials publicly criticized the film for downplaying their historical connection, while Greek historians were torn over its liberties with the Iliad. Meanwhile, German director Petersen was caught in the crossfire, trying to honor myth while telling a universal story. Even the costumes weren't safe from scrutiny. Troy's golden aesthetic, while visually stunning, had historians rolling their eyes. From leather-clad warriors to absurdly pristine armor, much of the wardrobe was criticized as historically inaccurate. Yet, Petersen and costume designer Bob Ringwood had no intention of making a documentary. They wanted style over strict realism. Achilles' armor, for instance, is entirely fictional but unforgettable. One especially strange detail emerged post-release. Fans with keen eyes noticed that during certain battle scenes, extras in the background were seen wearing watches. Yes, digital watches. Though likely an urban myth exaggerated by poor video uploads and speculation, it sparked countless forums and freeze-frame analyses. Warner Brothers denied it, but the rumor lives on, adding to the film's quirky legacy. Stranger still, Troy had an alternate cut, Troy, director's cut, released in 2007, which added over 30 minutes of footage. This version features bloodier battles, extended character scenes, and a far more somber tone. Petersen admitted he felt the theatrical version was softened by studio concerns over violence and runtime. The director's cut, he claimed, was closer to the film he intended to make. Fans agree. The darker version reveals more depth in characters like Briseis and Agamemnon, while restoring brutal realities glossed over in theaters. Behind the camera, Petersen had assembled a mammoth crew, over 1,500 cast and crew members at the peak of production. Massive sound stages had to be redesigned, and the visual effects team worked tirelessly to digitally create thousands of warriors for battle scenes, blending real stunt actors with CGI in ways that pushed the era's technology. The Siege of Troy required meticulous coordination between effects, choreography, and physical set destruction. One misstep could cause days of delay. And yet, through all of this, a strange beauty emerged. For all its chaos, Troy became more than just a film, it became a statement. A modern myth, created through the clash of egos, the destruction of million-dollar sets, and the tireless devotion of craftsmen who may never get mentioned in reviews, but whose fingerprints are embedded in every frame. Even now, decades later, Troy continues to spark debate. Was it too long? Too loose with history? Too serious? Or was it exactly what it set out to be? A meditation on the futility of war, the madness of kings, and the fragile glory that men chase with bloodied hands? What's certain is that the making of Troy was a saga in itself, one of accidents, ambition, and audacity. A film that nearly collapsed under the weight of its own scale, only to rise from the ashes and carve its place in cinematic legend. Just like the city it depicted, just like the warriors it immortalized. When Troy opens, it does so not with a burst of war, but with the quiet tension of diplomacy and the ancient, eternal pause before violence. That opening scene, where Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, faces off not with swords but with a single warrior duel, isn't just a practical shortcut to domination. It's a thesis statement. It introduces us to the economy of blood in this world, where kingdoms rise and fall on the might of singular legends. Enter Achilles, shirtless, half asleep, irritated at being summoned, and yet utterly unmatched. With one leap and a single deadly thrust, he ends a man's life and establishes his myth. But the real magic here lies not in the kill, but in Brad Pitt's embodiment of existential detachment. His Achilles is already at war with the world, not because he seeks conquest, but because he feels caged by it. That complexity quietly shapes every moment to come. Then there's the moment that launches the entire epic, the night Paris steals Helen. On paper, it's simple enough. A young, idealistic prince runs off with the Queen of Sparta. But on screen, it's drenched in tension, romance, and the unmistakable feeling that history is about to be rewritten by desire. The chemistry between Orlando Bloom's Paris and Diane Kruger's Helen isn't traditionally fiery, but rather hypnotic and ethereal, two dreamers caught in a fantasy, oblivious to the inferno they're igniting. For many viewers, this scene underscores a core theme of Troy, that the greatest wars are often started by the smallest, most personal impulses. Love, jealousy, pride. And then there's Hector. Eric Bana's performance anchors the film, offering a moral compass in a world unraveling into chaos. One of the most haunting scenes in the first half is Hector's return to Troy, where his wife Andromache pleads with him not to go to war. There's no grand speech here, just quiet dread. The way he cradles his son, placing his helmet on the child's head to make him laugh, only to see the baby cry in fear. It's a subtle heartbreak. It's a moment that resonates across time. The warrior who knows his path ends in death, but walks it anyway for duty, for family, for honor. This scene, for many critics, elevated Troy from a spectacle to a tragedy. It brought Shakespearean sorrow to a genre often filled with chest-thumping bravado. But perhaps no sequence better captures the visceral power of the film than the duel between Hector and Achilles. It's not just a battle, it's a reckoning. The choreography is fierce and grounded, raw without being chaotic. There's no music for most of the fight, only the sound of clashing bronze, panting breaths, and the weight of inevitability. Hector fights like a man, calm and measured, while Achilles moves like a storm. The build-up is masterful. You can feel the dread in Priam's eyes, the anguish in Andromache's stance atop the walls, and the horrifying rhythm in Achilles' circling. When Achilles finally strikes, there is no triumph, only fury. He desecrates Hector's body, dragging it behind his chariot, and in that act, reveals the true cost of vengeance. Critics often point to this as the emotional pivot of the film. Achilles may win, but something inside him dies with Hector. One of the most quietly powerful scenes, however, arrives in the aftermath of that brutality. Priam's visit to Achilles' tent. Peter O'Toole's performance is nothing short of legendary. With eyes weary from grief, he kneels before the man who killed his son. The vulnerability in his voice, the sheer gravity of a king humbling himself, is shattering. And Pitt responds not with dominance, but with a cracking facade. In that tent, Achilles ceases to be a godlike figure and becomes painfully human. He sees his own father in Priam's face, feels the weight of the blood on his hands. This is where Troy transforms, where themes of glory and legacy give way to questions of forgiveness, of mortality, of what truly remains after the dust of war settles. For audiences, this scene was unforgettable, not for its scale, but its humanity. Among the most divisive yet unforgettable elements of Troy is the treatment of Briseis. In the source material, she's little more than a pawn, a prize to be won or taken. But in the film, Rose Byrne's Briseis is given agency and inner conflict. One standout moment is her confrontation with Achilles, where she holds a dagger to his throat even as her emotions betray her. Their dynamic, part prisoner, part equal, shifts the narrative in unexpected directions. Critics have debated whether the film's romantic subplot between Achilles and Briseis weakens or enriches the story. But what's clear is that her presence adds another layer to Achilles' unraveling, a mirror to his pain, a reminder of what the gods once touched. As the film barrels toward its climax, another critical moment unfolds. The Greeks' deception with the wooden horse. Though absent from Homer's Iliad, its inclusion here is pivotal. The scene where the Trojans celebrate, pulling the horse into their city, is steeped in dramatic irony. Viewers know what's coming. The joy, the dancing, the relief. It's all too perfect, too premature. And then, in the dead of night, silence breaks. Greek soldiers pour from the belly of the beast like shadows from a nightmare. The cinematography tightens, the music turns ominous, and Troy's fall begins not with swords, but with realization. This moment, a masterclass in suspense, reminded audiences of the power of betrayal, not just in battle, but in storytelling. As the city burns, the film reaches its emotional crescendo. Paris, once so full of confidence and charm, is broken. He fights not for love or honor, but simply to survive. He urges Helen to flee, but she chooses to stay, no longer the passive figure of legend, but a woman who owns her place in this tragedy. The visual of the burning city, of the gods' statues toppling and temples in ruin, underscores Troy's ultimate message. No civilization, no matter how mighty, is immune to hubris. The myth of Troy becomes a cautionary tale, a mirror to the cycles of human conflict. But perhaps the most haunting image is Achilles' death. Shot by Paris with an arrow to the heel, a poetic end to a near-invincible man. There's no monologue, no prolonged goodbye, just disbelief, pain, and surrender. The man who defied fate, who sought immortality in battle, meets the end all men face. His story now etched in history, his body cradled by Briseis. In that moment, the film doesn't just close his arc, it delivers its final truth. Even the greatest heroes fall. But their stories, if told, endure. In analyzing Troy from a critical lens, What becomes clear is how it balances the spectacle of war with the subtlety of character. Critics have long debated its historical inaccuracies and departures from myth, but most agree on its emotional resonance. It's not a film that glorifies war, despite its scale. It mourns it, questions the price of legacy. It explores the fragility of power, the illusions of divinity, and the pain of being mortal in a world obsessed with eternity. Audience reactions have echoed this duality. Some entered expecting a simple sword and sandal blockbuster and were stunned by its introspective tone. Others wanted a faithful Homeric tale and felt conflicted by its humanist approach. But over time, Troy has carved a cult following, admired not just for its battles, but for its themes, for its willingness to ask, what is glory, really? And is it ever worth the cost? There's no shortage of grand set pieces in Troy, from the siege on the beaches to the fall of the great gates, but it's the quieter moments that linger. Achilles staring at the sea, wondering if history will remember his name. Hector telling his brother that honor isn't about survival, but sacrifice. Priam touching the hand of his son's killer. These are the pulses of the film, the moments that lift it from action to poetry. So when the final frames fade and the story ends, what remains isn't just the image of burning Troy or the echo of battle cries. It's a deep, resonant stillness, a recognition that all empires fade, that love, pride, ambition, and sorrow are the true architects of history, and that, in the end, the myths we tell reflect not just gods and warriors but ourselves. There's something about Troy that feels carved into stone the moment the first frame hits the screen. The way the sand sweeps across the Aegean shores, the sun blazes over ancient cities, and bronze-armored soldiers glint under war's shadow. It doesn't just look like history. It breathes it. But to make a film feel timeless takes far more than just costume and camera. It requires a monumental fusion of artistry, vision, and grit. The road to bringing Troy to life was long, dust-covered, and filled with trial by fire, much like the story it told. Wolfgang Petersen, the visionary director behind Das Boot and The Perfect Storm, wasn't just staging a war epic, he was orchestrating a living myth. From the outset, he was adamant about grounding this tale in something tangible. No flying gods or lightning bolts from Mount Olympus. This wasn't going to be fantasy, it would be ancient reality. To make that happen, the production needed to go where the modern world still whispers of antiquity. And they found it, surprisingly, in Mexico. Though Troy is set across the Aegean, it was shot primarily on the Baja California peninsula. Why? Logistics, landscape, and light. The team constructed massive sets on Rosarito Beach, where Titanic once sank, and reshaped the coastline to resemble the ancient shores of Troy. Every piece of architecture, every sun-baked stone was built from scratch. Massive walls, gates, and battlements were hand-constructed, using a blend of historical references and production design wizardry. It wasn't just set dressing. It was a physical world the actors could breathe in. The walls of Troy were real, towering over actors and crew, casting shadows that made scenes come alive with authenticity. But nature, as always, had its own script. During filming, a once-in-a-generation hurricane slammed into the coast. Sets were destroyed. Production halted. Entire sequences had to be rescheduled and rebuilt. Brad Pitt, who had bulked up and trained rigorously for months to embody Achilles, tore his Achilles tendon, of all things. It was the kind of cruel irony that almost felt too poetic. That injury forced the crew to reorganize the entire shoot, delaying action-heavy sequences and relying on close-ups, stunt doubles, and clever editing until he healed. Despite these setbacks, Troy never lost its visual grandeur. Much of that is thanks to the film's cinematographer Roger Pratt, whose experience on Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire and Batman served him well here. Instead of relying on dark, gritty tones, Troy is bathed in golden light and ancient dust. Every frame looks like a fading mural, an epic told through the palette of history. The sun is a recurring motif, used not just for beauty, but as a symbol of fading glory. Battles happen in open daylight, where there's no hiding from fate. Interiors are lit by fire and gold, echoing the gods even in their absence. Petersen also made a bold decision with his camera work. Keep the battles clean, grounded, and legible. There's no shaky cam chaos here. Instead, the choreography is smooth, brutal, and focused on character. Nowhere is this more evident than in the duel between Hector and Achilles. It wasn't just staged like a fight, it was designed like a ballet of death. The actors trained for months with swordmasters. No stuntmen were used for the main moves. Brad Pitt and Bana insisted on doing it themselves. The result is electric. You can see the tension, the control, the exhaustion. Every swing feels like it could kill. And unlike many modern action films, Troy doesn't cut every 2 seconds. The camera lingers. It watches. It respects the duel the way a crowd in ancient times would. But what really brings the war scenes to life is the use of practical effects combined with groundbreaking digital artistry. Over 1,000 extras were employed for battle scenes. But to swell the Greek army into the tens of thousands, Petersen turned to the visual effects team at MPC and Framestore. They developed advanced crowd simulation software, some of the most complex at the time, which allowed digital soldiers to react independently, giving the illusion of thousands upon thousands of warriors clashing across the plains. Each digital figure had its own animations, reactions, and collisions, which gave the battles an organic, terrifying scale without losing clarity. This technique was a major leap in VFX realism, paving the way for later epics like 300 and Kingdom of Heaven. Another subtle but crucial aspect was the sound design. Every clang of bronze, thud of shield, and piercing scream was layered with intention. The Foley team recorded custom sounds for armor clashes, using authentic materials to replicate the weight and tone of ancient warfare. The arrows didn't just fly, they whistled with death. The gates didn't just fall, they groaned like gods being toppled. It's immersive, even overwhelming. The sound isn't just background, it's emotional punctuation. Then there's James Horner's score, a sweeping, melancholic symphony of strings, percussion, and tribal chants. Horner, who also scored Titanic and Braveheart, had a gift for composing not just music but emotion. In Troy, his score acts as a character of its own. During battles, it pulses like a war drum in the heart. In moments of sorrow, like Hector's death or Priam's plea, it whispers with ancient mourning. Horner even collaborated with Bulgarian vocalist Tanya Zarovska, whose haunting vocals became the soul of Helen's lament and Achilles' regret. The score doesn't tell you what to feel, it drags the feeling out of you. Interestingly, many of the costumes and props were based on archaeological finds but infused with creative liberties. Achilles' armor, for instance, was inspired by Mycenaean designs but reimagined to be sleek, iconic, and symbolic. His shield, shaped like the sun, echoed his larger-than-life presence. Hector's gear was more traditional, reflecting his role as a protector. Paris, in contrast, wore lighter, more ornamental pieces, beautiful but fragile. Each costume subtly reflected character, status, and fate. And let's not forget the ships. Massive Greek warships, replicas built at full scale, were constructed on floating platforms off the coast. These weren't models, they were actual vessels, maneuvered and filmed on the ocean to give a sense of authenticity. When the fleet arrives on the Trojan shore, it's not just a visual effect. It's a logistical triumph. The sense of awe the Trojans feel in that moment was mirrored by the crew witnessing it for the first time. Among the most fascinating production anecdotes is how Petersen directed the actors to behave like demigods, but without ever acknowledging the divine. Achilles never calls on Zeus. Hector never invokes Apollo. Yet the weight of the gods is everywhere, in architecture, in ritual, in music. Petersen believed that the power of myth would speak louder if never spoken aloud. And he was right. There's a sacred, mythic energy that flows through the film precisely because it never resorts to the supernatural. It honors the source while crafting something new. There were challenges behind the camera, too. The screenplay, written by David Benioff, who would later co-create Game of Thrones, had to condense and reshape Homer's sprawling Iliad into a coherent 2.5-hour narrative. That meant cutting the gods, compressing timelines, and reimagining characters. Some fans of the source material pushed back, but many praised how the story became more human, more tragic, and arguably more relevant. Achilles wasn't a pawn of prophecy. He was a man trying to define his own legend. Even post-production had its own drama. The initial cut of Troy was longer, more character-driven, and darker. But studio pressures led to a shorter theatrical release. Years later, Petersen released a director's cut, over 30 minutes longer, with richer subplots, restored dialogue, and a more deliberate pace. For many fans and critics, it's the definitive version. And watching it, you can feel the director's voice more clearly. Scenes breathe longer. Emotions land harder. In hindsight, Troy is not just a film about a war. It is a war between artistic vision and studio mandates, between myth and reality, between the eternal and the impermanent. And through it all, its production stood as a feat of old-school craftsmanship in an era inching toward CGI saturation. It's a film where every arrow fired had weight, every sword had rust, and every city had dust underfoot. A film that didn't just tell a story, it built it. Looking back, what makes Troy a technical marvel isn't that it pioneered one singular innovation. It's that it blended hundreds of traditional techniques with just the right amount of digital enhancement to create something that still holds up 2 decades later. It walked the tightrope between classic and modern, spectacle and soul. And maybe that's the most fitting tribute to a film about legends. Not to recreate the past exactly as it was, but to retell it with fire, with fury, and with a craftsmanship that ensures it, too, will be remembered. Beneath the clash of swords, the fire of siege, and the mournful wails of a doomed city, Troy pulses with deeper truths, timeless, human, and unshakably tragic. It's a story where the gods are absent, but their shadow lingers over every decision, every death, and every moment of glory. As the dust of battle settles and the flames consume the great walls of Troy, what lingers is not just the memory of war, but the haunting realization of what drove it. Pride, legacy, love, vengeance, fate. These are not just the motivations of kings and warriors, but the very fabric of Troy's soul. At its core, Troy is a meditation on mortality. Achilles, the unmatched warrior, the embodiment of masculine perfection, is cursed with self-awareness. He knows he is destined to die young, but in return, his name will echo through eternity. His every action is driven not by conquest, but by legacy. You will never be forgotten, he is told, and those words burn brighter than any torch. Achilles becomes the film's tragic philosopher, wielding his sword not to protect or punish, but to etch his name into history. And yet, as he watches his comrades fall, as he meets a priestess who sees the man beneath the legend, he begins to ask the unanswerable. Is immortality worth the cost of everything else? That question becomes the beating heart of Troy. Every major character is caught in this web of existential longing. Hector fights not because he wants glory, but because he loves his city, his wife, his son. He doesn't seek immortality, he seeks peace. And yet, he too is trapped by honor, by the expectations of kingship, by the unwinnable battle against fate. When he faces Achilles, it's not just a duel. It's an offering to the gods of time. Two ideals colliding. The pursuit of eternal fame versus the preservation of human love. Even Helen, often vilified by myth as the face that launched 1,000 ships, becomes something else here. She's not a temptress, but a woman seeking freedom from a loveless royal life. Her affair with Paris is painted not as betrayal, but as a desperate attempt at self-ownership. Yet the film doesn't absolve her. She watches the destruction her presence has invited, not with arrogance, but with quiet devastation. Her beauty is less a gift and more a curse, worshipped, objectified, and blamed. She becomes a symbol of how women are so often made to bear the weight of men's ambitions. That weight is shared by Briseis, a Trojan priestess captured by the Greeks and claimed by Achilles. At first glance, she might seem like a trophy of war, but in truth, she becomes its moral compass. Her interactions with Achilles aren't just about tenderness, they're about transformation. Through her, Achilles confronts the humanity he's tried so hard to bury. When he spares her life, it's the first crack in his armor. When she kills Agamemnon, it's not vengeance, it's liberation. She, more than anyone, refuses to be defined by men's war. And war, glorious, cruel, seductive war, is the film's ever-present god. It is worshipped by some, cursed by others, but never avoided. Troy doesn't glamorize it, even when it dazzles with bronze and blood. Every victory comes with a price. The Greeks are not heroic invaders. They're power-hungry, fractured, led by men like Agamemnon, who sees Troy not as a rival, but a stepping stone. The Trojans are not innocent victims either. They are proud, unwilling to bend, locked in tradition and honor. Both sides bleed for reasons that crumble the moment they're spoken aloud. The film plays with the idea of honor as a double-edged sword. Hector's loyalty becomes his doom. Paris's defiance sparks destruction. Priam's nobility cannot shield his people. And Achilles, for all his skill, cannot outrun the consequences of his wrath. The battle between personal morality and public expectation is constant. When Priam kneels before Achilles, asking for Hector's body, it's not just a plea from one father to another. It's a breaking of cycles. For a moment, humanity eclipses war. Achilles weeps. The man returns, if only briefly, beneath the armor of legend. Symbolism saturates the film's visual language. The city of Troy itself becomes a metaphor, majestic, defiant, and doomed. Its towering walls symbolize tradition, strength, and ultimately, isolation. It is impenetrable not just to armies but to change. The Greeks' wooden horse, a gift turned curse, is the ultimate symbol of deceit wrapped in beauty, of the thin line between worship and destruction. It is also the embodiment of humanity's greatest flaw, our ability to disguise ruin as triumph. Achilles' armor is another visual metaphor. Sleek, dark, lion-like. It reflects his predatory nature and his role as both protector and destroyer. When he dons it, he becomes more myth than man. But when he removes it, especially in his final moments, he becomes vulnerable. Mortal. Human. The moment he faces Paris, unarmored, with arrows piercing his body, we see the full spectrum of what he's become, both godlike and heartbreakingly real. The use of light and fire throughout the film is deliberate and layered. Battles blaze in sunlight, not in darkness, exposing everything. There are no shadows to hide in, no mystery to mask brutality. And when Troy burns, it's not just the fall of a city, it's the fall of an idea. That civilization, no matter how great, can be eternal. That honor can shield you from the ambitions of men. That love can survive the politics of kings. Troy also reflects on the creation and manipulation of myth. Odysseus, portrayed with quiet calculation by Sean Bean, constantly reminds others, and us, that stories are more powerful than truth. If they ever tell my story, let them say that I walked with giants, Achilles muses. In Troy, myths are not born of miracles. They're born of men who refuse to be forgotten. And those myths, like the wooden horse, can be beautiful on the outside and hollow within. This tension between story and reality mirrors real-world dynamics. How often do nations go to war not for survival but for image, legacy, ego? How often are individuals pushed into roles, hero, villain, lover, traitor, not by truth, but by the stories others want to tell? Troy asks these questions without preaching. It lets the futility of its own tragedy answer them. The film also serves as a commentary on the male ego and its devastating ripple effects. Achilles, Agamemnon, Hector, Paris. Each man makes choices driven by pride, power, and perception. Their women, Briseis, Helen, Andromache, are left to endure the consequences. And yet, in the quiet corners of the film, it's the women who show the most resilience, the deepest understanding of what truly matters. Love, family, peace, things the men claim to fight for, but so often destroy in their pursuit of glory. In many ways, Troy is a story about legacy and the lies we tell to build it. Achilles wants to be remembered, but the memory he leaves is one soaked in blood. Agamemnon wants to be an emperor, but he dies not on a battlefield, but at the hands of a slave. Hector wants to protect his people, but his death becomes the signal of their end. Paris, the romantic, becomes a reluctant destroyer. And yet, it's the quiet moments that linger most. Priam kissing his son's body, Briseis walking away from Achilles, the citizens of Troy fleeing through underground passages as their world collapses above them. These images reflect deeper truths about civilization and collapse. Troy falls not because of weakness, but because of arrogance. Its leaders believed in walls more than wisdom. The Greeks win, but at the cost of their souls. It's a reflection of every empire that's ever risen, ever burned. The lesson isn't in the conquest, it's in the cost. Perhaps that's why Troy continues to resonate. In an age where power is still worshipped, where leaders still wage wars for pride, where stories still shape public perception, this film strips away the gods and shows us ourselves. Fallible, proud, tragic, and yet it offers something else too. A glimpse of grace, in Priam's forgiveness, in Hector's quiet bravery, in Briseis's defiance, in Achilles' final, tender gestures. These moments remind us that even in war, there can be humanity, that even in legend, there can be truth. In the end, Troy doesn't just tell the story of a city's fall. It reflects our own, our cycles of violence, our thirst for recognition, our blindness to consequence. It's a mirror polished in bronze, gleaming with beauty and soaked in warning. And when the flames die down and the ash settles, what remains is not a tale of victory, but a cautionary epic about what it means to be remembered, and at what cost. As the sun rises over a dusty plain and the camera glides low across a sea of armored men, Troy reveals itself not just as a story of ancient war, but as a visual epic where every frame is carved with intention. Wolfgang Petersen's direction, Roger Pratt's sweeping cinematography, and Gabriel Yared's emotionally charged score work together like a synchronized war dance, delivering a visceral cinematic experience that transcends the boundaries of history and legend. From the very first frame, Troy establishes its mythic tone. The opening sequence doesn't simply introduce a conflict. It asserts a visual grammar rooted in symmetry, scale, and awe. The vast armies, clothed in earthy bronze and dust-swept armor, stand not as individuals but as collective forces of fate. Petersen ensures that even static frames pulse with life. The use of wide shots emphasizes the insignificance of man against the grand canvas of history. Soldiers become ants crawling toward an inevitable end, and cities like Troy emerge as colossuses of stone and pride, dominating the landscape with an ancient reverence. But amid the grandeur, the camera always finds the individual. One of the most striking elements of Troy's visual storytelling is its juxtaposition between the massive and the intimate. During large-scale battles, sweeping crane shots and fluid tracking movements provide a god's-eye view of chaos. Yet the moment the swordplay begins, the camera closes in tight, handheld, shaky, forcing us into the blood and breath of the warriors. Petersen and Pratt blur the line between observer and participant. In one heartbeat, you're watching history unfold. In the next, you're on the ground, blinking through sweat and dust beside Achilles himself. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the legendary duel between Achilles and Hector. The build-up alone is a masterclass in suspense. The blocking is spare, the colors muted, and the city behind Hector looms like a tombstone waiting to claim its hero. Petersen resists the urge to cut too quickly. Instead, he holds on faces, on anticipation, on the weight of inevitability. When the fight begins, the camera moves with surgical precision, mirroring Achilles' fluid, panther-like grace, and Hector's grounded, disciplined movements. Every slash and feint is accentuated not just by choreography but by sound. The whoosh of a blade slicing air, the crack of impact, the dull thud of feet against sand. The editing here is brutally elegant, never rushed, never showy, because the emotion is doing the heavy lifting. And emotion, in Troy, is always embedded in the image. The use of color alone tells its own story. The film's palette is dominated by sun-bleached earth tones, browns, golds, bronzes, evoking both the glory and decay of ancient civilization. The Greeks are draped in worn, battle-hardened garb, while the Trojans are adorned in regal reds and silks that suggest a world of sophistication soon to be reduced to rubble. Even within Troy's walls, the lighting feels golden but shadowed, as if the city is basking in a final sunset it doesn't yet know is its last. One of Petersen's most poignant stylistic choices is how he contrasts movement with stillness. In the chaos of war, he inserts moments of quiet. Briseis kneeling before a blood-soaked Achilles, Helen gazing silently from a tower, Priam walking through the city's halls like a ghost. These pauses serve as emotional exhalations. The camera lingers, unafraid of silence. It allows the audience to feel the weight of what's happening, not just watch it. And the set design reinforces this tone. Every hall of Troy, every Greek encampment, every ship that cuts through the Aegean Sea is constructed with detail that feels lived in, not just decorative. Troy itself feels ancient, with stone pillars weathered by time and footsteps. Interiors are dimly lit with firelight, shadows dancing across textured walls, evoking a sense of sacred intimacy and dread. The visual aesthetic never lets you forget. These are people trying to build permanence in a world ruled by impermanence. Lighting plays a crucial role in capturing this tension. Natural light dominates the film. Whether it's morning haze over battlefields or the scorching noonday sun beating down on armor, Troy constantly uses light to shape mood and perspective. Sunlight doesn't just illuminate, it reveals. It exposes the rawness of combat, the truth behind heroism, the loneliness behind leadership. And when night falls, the fire becomes the new language. Flickering torchlight inside Troy's palace speaks of ritual, tradition, secrets. When the city burns, the orange glow becomes apocalyptic, less like fire and more like the rage of forgotten gods reclaiming what men tried to build.